All right. So tell me, what made you want to become a filmmaker?
Um, well, both my parents were actors actually, and uh, they weren't like hugely famous or even that successful, but they were, jobbing actors. And my dad until I was like, maybe like in my late teens or something. But like having that background growing up, they just introduced me to like a lot of like great films, which I loved, and the kind of films that you wouldn't necessarily be seeing when you're like 5 or 6 or something like that, So like I just got to see at this kind of crash course of great cinema, and I just fell in love with it. And I think at school I had some kind of dyslexia and various things which held me back on a certain level, and I just but where I really thrived was in my imagination and visual processing and just putting together things in a visual manner. And as I went on, I slowly started meeting kind of like-minded people, and I ended up going to this one school when I was 16, and I bumped into a friend of mine that I hadn't seen since we were like 4 or something, since we were at preschool together. And he was like wearing a leather jacket with, I think it was either like Giga's Alien or some Giga design on the back of his jacket that he hand painted beautifully. And I was just like, oh yeah, this guy, he's going to be my friend again. And we just went off and started making little movies together. Like, yeah, age 16, we started making stuff, and just really, although before that, I think when I was 13, I made my first film, which was like a little Super 8 one reel, like of it was kind of my remake of Herschel Gordon Lewis's Wizard of Gore. And for some reason that really spoke to me at that age, and I decided to kind of remake it. So that was it, really. I just fell in love and just carried on from there.
That's awesome. If you had to pick, like one movie that kind of inspires you, what would it be?
Oh, damn, that's a hard question. Uh, I think, I mean, there are so many movies that inspired me. You know, Obviously, got to go back to again my kind of like early years, like like maybe like early teens or whatever. And I think the spaghetti westerns were a big thing, which kind of like drew me in. For some reason, I was just very much something about that was very romantic to me in a weird way. But I think the film which probably did a lot for me was Evil Dead, actually, just because it was the first film. It come out. It was maybe a slight, not quite my generation, a generation before, and but it was still. I think I was kind of. I think Evil Dead 2 came out around the time I got into like horror, and but then going back and revisiting Evil Dead, it was kind of like a doorway which like opened on a level of like, well, before then, I thought that films were made by, these kind of like exalted geniuses that I could never see myself as being, and then I just saw them as kind of gods in a way. And then, but then I saw this film, Evil Dead, and I was just like, oh, this has been made by like young kids, just going out there their nearby like forest and just doing this, and they're building all the like camera gear themselves. They're like doing all the effects themselves. And that was like a real kind of like light bulb moment where I was just like, okay, this is actually something that is accessible to me. I can do this with my friends. We can go out and do the same thing. So that was probably like so instrumental in moving me from being a film fan into being a filmmaker.
Right. You don't get much better than Evil Dead. I mean, it's iconic.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing, but it was just so cool that it was like, yeah, that it was these, yeah, you know, and it was also the time, the Coen brothers as well. They were like, they just were starting around then as well, and they were just, yeah, they were all young at the time, young kids at the time, just going off and making these films, kind of raising the money on their own and doing it just, which was just so inspiring. You know, after seeing all these like Hollywood movies, which just seemed to be like, God, how am I ever going to get there? You know. So yeah, that was a big moment.
Yeah, it's Evil Dead is important to a whole lot of people.
Yeah, yeah, of course, yeah. But I mean, there's
Right.
like, I mean, I could really go into a big list of movies that really were very instrumental to me. You know, uh, but I mean, I think Texas Chainsaw on a similar level was kind of really interesting in terms of how, again, it was just like made on such a shoestring, but it has such an enormous impact. And, you know, it opened me up to the power of more of the kind of filmmaking, the tools accessible to a filmmaker to make something really like powerful, you know, like on with very little money. You know, because you still watch that film and it still has the same impact, and you don't sit there seeing, you know, I still watch that film and I never think, that doesn't look believable, or that's kind of like, that's not aged well, and you know, that looks cheap or whatever. It looks raw, the whole thing, without looking like cheap. It just looks real, you know, which is what makes it so disturbing. And then obviously when you kind of like bring the sound effects into it, it's just like, wow, that's just like how they use sound to push the horror element was really extraordinary.
Right, right. I agree. And speaking of films, your new film, The Seeding, is coming out.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you
I
not
mean,
only directed it, but you wrote it as well. So tell us how it came to be.
um, well, you know, I wanted to, I decided that, like, you know, we wanted to make a movie for a long time. For years, I had a career in music videos and commercials, and did all sorts of stuff, documentaries, and I just wanted to move into film. And um, since I kind of like knew horror so well, I just thought that that was kind of like the route to go, especially when I started writing it, because it just seemed like horror was the one genre which was like consistently sort of fundable, basically. And uh, so I was just like searching for ideas. I knew I wanted something which was kind of a contained story, which took place one location, very few cast members, something I could control easily, and kind of to the point where I could leave some level of, you know, artistic impact on it. And um, I, yeah, I was in the desert with my wife, and we were walking through the desert, and she was pregnant at the time, and with my son, and I just had this kind of, you know, the story just kind of came to me there. Actually, it was just this like, oh yeah, this is like, here it is. You know, this is, you know, I think when you're in the desert, I, I'm pretty inspired just walking through the desert, and you feel kind of like a whole mixture of feelings of vulnerability and kind of just kind of a slight level of fear there, of just being unsafe to the elements, and the idea of like getting lost and what could happen in that situation. And then you're also very much up against nature and what it presents, you know, and kind of how you first hand witness to the kind of cycle of life in nature, basically. Like you just see it everywhere around you in the desert. And I think, yeah, all these things, just spending time there, all these things just like came into my head, and the story came from there.
Where exactly did you film? Because it's so stunning, but it's so almost otherworldly, you know?
Yeah, we shot in southern Utah, and in a place called Kanab, and it's a very beautiful part of the world. I've got to say, it's extremely beautiful. It was very there was a canyon there, and that whole area of Utah has a lot of canyons and extraordinary kind of rock formations, and we spent about, I don't know, the better part of a year searching across the whole globe trying to find somewhere, like talking to people from various production companies, and everywhere from like Romania to Mexico to Canada, like all over the place. And but we were quite keen on just keeping it here, because obviously the story was set here, and um yeah, we just wanted the ease of having a crew who spoke our language and those kind of things. Uh, and Utah offered some great tax incentives. And one day, yeah, this email came in with these pictures of this canyon, and which didn't actually look like that in real life. It's not entire. We did some posts to seal the canyon off. But what it did offer me was this just like what was there was just so extraordinary, and it kind of it felt like not only did it feel was it really beautiful, but it also had this slightly kind of, I don't know, for some reason I felt it had this like feminine feel to it, which was really obviously tied in with the story a lot. And just this idea of felt like being in a kind of womb or something like that, which again, yeah, seemed like the right fit. But and it also had just outside of the main location, the canyon there were all these other little spots, like so close. It just offered so much. And yeah, it was great. It was great shooting there. It was just beautiful place to be. Although I was kind of generally in my own personal hell when I was doing it, so I wasn't really able to appreciate the beauty. But yeah,
It's an it's such an eerie place.
yeah,
But it's so pretty. But the story is very dark and gritty.
yeah.
It's not pleasant.
No,
And
it's not a fun, not a fun movie. Yeah, yeah, I know. I remember like in post production when I was editing it, like it was like one of the times we watched it when we were getting close to locking the cut, and I watched it and I was just like, yeah, okay, it's getting there. We're nearly finished. But damn, this is like a brutal film. This is like it's not a fun ride.
no, it's not, but I enjoyed it a lot.
Mm,
And I'm a big fan of Scott Hayes. I think he's
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah,
And he really does capture that tortured, tormented, soul just stuck there.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's so intense.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the shoot was really intense. Everything about the making of the film was intense. The shoot was intense. Working with Scott was intense. And uh, it was just a really hard, like kind of painful experience. But I think when I was editing, actually, I had this feeling that no matter how concerned I was whether this section was working or this one was missing something, and was this film going to be any good or what? Like I always just had this like one thing that I could rely on, which was just like, well, I just felt like when you go through an experience like that, which is so intense, something of it has got to end up on the screen in the end. You've got to get that can't, you can't just like go through that and end up with just this like light throwaway movie. It's got to have some that kind of real visceral intensity in there. So that kept me going. But yeah, but he was, you know, I knew, well, no, I didn't know. I'd never worked with him before, and I wasn't super familiar with his work. I became familiar, but um, I just had this feeling from talking to him the first time I spoke to him, like he was like sitting on this bed in some hotel room at a festival, and he just had this kind of way about him. This was just over Zoom as well, you know. But even over Zoom, I could see there was something about him, which I just felt like, okay, this guy is going to be able to go to the place that I want this character to go to, you know. And that was so important because I just felt like there are a lot of actors out there who, you know, can be great and likable and charismatic or whatever it is, you know. But when it gets to reaching that point where they have to like tip over into some kind of uh yeah, just like primal version of themselves, like are they going to be able to get there, you know? And I just felt like he would, and he did. So yeah, I was very happy about that.
Yeah, well, both the stars were fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it, like I said, it's such a gritty story, and that it's got so much, desperation and just, it has a heart to it. I mean, it feels very alive. Like, this
Mm,
is a
mm.
terrible situation, but it could really happen because there's crazy people out there,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah. America we live in here, you know. Stuff happens. It's wild.
Yeah, it is. And there's one scene in particular that struck me, and I'm trying to figure out how not to spoil it.
Mm,
There's a scene with a young man in the top of the crater, hole, cavern,
mm,
whatever this,
mm,
area is, and just the way that Kate screams, just the
mm,
guttural, and the look on everybody's face. It was so freaking intense.
yeah. I know. Well, like, I kind of knew that. I mean, this is the film that I was going to make. You know, it was going to be that kind of a film where it was really, it had to feel real and kind of uh, just not like nasty, but like, you know, the violence. Uh, okay, so basically, again, going back to like where the idea came from, like I just think that like in nature, nature can be inherently violent, and it can also be extraordinarily beautiful. And so that's kind of what I was trying to get to with the film, is to get to a place where on one hand it's horribly violent and it's kind of uh but the violence is somehow necessary in a way to keep the 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 cycle moving. um and also I just felt like it needed to have some moments in there of like of beauty as well, because again it's nature and it's just like you have to kind of counterbalance it, so there has to be the moments of quiet, and they also obviously exacerbate how like intense the violence is, you know. So yeah.
Well, you did a great job with it. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Um, and it definitely, it kind of does have a similar feel to Texas Chainsaw in a
Mm,
way, but there are those brief moments of sweetness and just
Yeah.
like passion, and then there's the opposite with that intense brutality. But it's a horror movie. That's it's kind of what you want.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think, yeah, also I was really into the idea of like fables, the idea of just like these little kind of short stories, which kind of, and it felt like a fable in a way, like, this, um, and that was something which influenced it. I was very into these kind of environmental, what I look at as like environmental thrillers or something, that came out from Australia in the 70s. These movies like Walkabout was one of them, and um, yeah, Nicholas Rogue's Walkabout, and Peter Weir's Picnic Hanging Rock, and Ted Kocheff's Wake in Fright. There were three films from Australia from the 70s where they used, they were pretty, like, again, really kind of gritty. Well, less so Picnic Hanging Rock, but they had this like grit to them, and primal fear. These real kind of tapping into real like primal fears. But they're also beautiful, and like you watch these films, and you're like, wow, like the landscape, and just playing with the duality of nature, of just like how shocking it can be on one hand and how beautiful it can be on the other. Those films were big inspiration for this as well.
Well, I think you accomplished that.
Thank you.
Now that you're in the world of horror, do you plan to continue with horror movies?
Yeah, absolutely. I love horror movies, and I like the horror world as well. And I just I've always been drawn to it, and I am writing something at the moment, which is in that world, but it's quite far removed from the seeding. It's more like, I call it my like Upper East Side body horror. It's like sort of Cronenberg meets Polanski, So it's a very different world, a much more clinical, not gritty, clinical, clean, but but still pretty brutal in its own weird way. So yeah, I'm still there, still hanging in there.
That's awesome, and I can't wait to see what it does. And like I said, you did great with this movie, and I think you're going to make one hell of an impact in the horror genre.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You've proven that you can trigger those sensations of primal fear, but also that creepy feeling that just kind of creeps up your backbone when you're somewhere where you're not sure what's going on, and
Yeah.
you're isolated, and you got all of that nailed,
Yeah.
nailed down. So I'm sure that the next one will be great.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, yeah. Well, like I said, it's like it's a genre which, I find like endlessly fascinating, and there's just so many different areas to go down. I don't know whether I'll always stick in horror, but it's where my heart lies. But then we started this conversation with me saying that like I loved spaghetti westerns when I was growing up as well. So who knows? Maybe there'll be one of those somewhere down the line as well.
You can always make a horror spaghetti western.
Yeah, totally. Love that. That sounds like a great idea. I just don't want to go back to the desert for a bit, that's all. A little
But
break, a little
it's
break from that.
yeah, I'm sure it gets nice and hot, and it's probably not an easy place to film.
No, it's not. It's not. But I still love it. But yeah.
That's fantastic. So let me ask you this: if you had to tell our readers, using 5 words about describing this movie, what would they be?
Uh, well, it's gonna give you a sentence. Is a sentence okay?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Um, bloated corpse rotting in the sun.
That, the fact that I've seen the movie, that is more than appropriate.
Yeah. I think that's the kind of like vibe I was going for. Just like, just decay in nature. And it's horrible, but it's also like a part of life. And
Yeah.
um it's like from the decay, the flower is born. So yeah.
That's amazing. And I can't wait to see what, everybody's got to say about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for talking to me about it. It's been a
Well,
pleasure.
it's my pleasure.